The air was thick with the sounds of laughter and the faint hum of car engines. A golden retriever, emaciated and weary, watched from behind a rusted fence. His eyes, dull and brown, mirrored the fading autumn light as he huddled by the curb, each bone in his body aching with cold. He had learned to stay in the shadows, blending into the landscape, as families passed by in their warm cars, children laughing and pressing their faces against the windows, completely unaware of the creature whose gaze lingered on them. Every day, the same families came and went, living lives that felt foreign to him. He could never be a part of their world. An outcast, a stray, and perhaps that was all he'd ever be. But one evening, as the sky bled orange and the streets quieted, a little girl in a pink coat with braided hair stopped. She wasn't like the others. The world shifted then. Tiny hands, gentle and unsure, reached out toward him. And for the first time in months, the dog felt something he thought was long lost: hope. The dog sat in the shadows, his coat matted and ragged, eyes dull as they stared out at the world that passed him by. Families came and went, laughing, driving in cars with shining windows, their lives unfolding in a blur of warmth and color that felt so distant from his own cold, lonely reality. He had grown accustomed to being invisible, a ghost on the edge of their world, a forgotten soul. Every car, every person, every door that opened and shut only reminded him of how far removed he was from the life he used to know. There had once been a time when he had a home, a small house with a backyard where he ran in the sun, his fur bright and glossy. But that was long ago. Now, he was just a stray roaming the streets in search of scraps and shelter. His stomach often ached, his body thin and tired, but the ache in his heart was always the hardest to bear. He had learned to survive on his own, but it was never enough to fill the emptiness inside. He watched families with longing, wondering if he would ever know what it felt like to belong again. And then one day something shifted. A small figure appeared, standing still by the fence. A little girl, no older than 5, with a bright pink coat and thick braids hanging down her back. She looked at him, not with the usual indifference or fear, but with curiosity and something deeper. She saw him. Her eyes locked with his, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the dog felt seen. She took a step closer, her small hands trembling as she held something out toward him. A piece of bread, perhaps, or a cookie, something to offer. The dog hesitated, wary of humans after all the hurt he had known, but her gaze was so warm, so inviting. Slowly, he inched closer, the sound of his claws scraping the concrete loud in the quiet street. He could smell the bread, the softness of her presence, and for a moment, he almost forgot the years of abandonment. The little girl didn't speak, just stood there, her eyes never leaving his. She understood something about him, something unspoken. Maybe she knew, like he did, that he had been waiting for something, someone, to notice him. His ears perked up, and with a soft exhale, he took the bread from her hand. Lily returned the next day, and the next. Each time she brought food, her steps more confident, her smile a little wider. With each visit, the dog, whom she had started calling Max, began to trust her a little more. Her presence was like sunlight breaking through the dark clouds that had consumed his world. Every gesture, every tender look, was a gift that he had long stopped expecting. Max would sit by the fence waiting, knowing she would come. And when she did, he felt a flutter in his chest, a small spark of something he thought was gone forever. But despite the bond they were forming, Max remained guarded. His heart had been broken too many times to give it away easily. He had been abandoned, forgotten, left behind when he was no longer wanted. He couldn't allow himself to believe that this little girl, so pure, so kind, wouldn't disappear too. She was just another family, another fleeting moment in a world that had no place for him. And then one day, she didn't come. The hours passed, the sun dipped low in the sky, and still, no sign waited by the fence, his eyes straining for a glimpse of her pink coat, her braids swaying as she walked. But she never appeared. Night fell, the cold creeping into his bones, and still there was no Lily. He had known this feeling before, the sharp sting of loss. It was all too familiar. The dog, defeated, slunk back into the shadows, his heart heavy with the weight of her absence. He tried to shake it off, but it lingered, gnawing at him. Where had she gone? Why hadn't she come back? Days turned into weeks, and Max's world became smaller, colder. He had no idea where Lily had gone, but her absence haunted him. The families continued to pass by, unaware of the dog who had once watched them with longing eyes. But now his eyes were duller, his steps slower. The world felt even more distant, even more out of reach. Max had almost given up. He no longer waited by the fence, no longer stared down the street with hope in his eyes. The hunger gnawed at him constantly, but it wasn't just his body that was starving, it was his soul. He had loved and he had lost. And now, he had no reason to believe that anyone would ever stay. Then, on a day like any other, a family came down the street. They didn't stop. They didn't even look at him. But something about them made him pause. They were different. They didn't have the air of people who were looking for a dog to rescue. They weren't looking for a story. They were simply walking, as if life was just happening around them. But as they passed, the little girl, maybe 5, maybe 6, looked over at him. Her eyes were full of pity, but there was something else too. Something more than just a passing glance. Without thinking, Max stood up and walked toward them. His legs trembled as he approached, the hunger that had been gnawing at him now feeding into a deeper need. The girl saw him and slowed, crouching down as she reached out a hand. Her parents didn't stop, didn't notice, but she did. She was the first to see him. Her hand hovered in the air, but she didn't pull it back. Max approached her, his heart beating harder now. He knew what was about to happen. This was it, the chance he had almost stopped believing in. Would he trust again? Would he let them in? Or would he retreat back into the shadows, where it was safe? His decision was made for him in that moment. He didn't run. He stepped forward and nudged her hand, seeking the warmth he had been denied for so long. The family, though uncertain, had taken him in. The warmth of their home was everything Max had dreamed of, but it was also everything he was afraid of. There was kindness, yes, but there was also the fear that it would end, that they would turn him out, just like the others had. The first night, he didn't sleep. He lay on the soft bed, staring at the door, waiting for the sound of footsteps retreating down the hallway. He wanted to believe he was safe, wanted to trust the family that had taken him in, but his past wouldn't let him. The girl, whose name he learned was Emily, climbed into bed with him the next morning. She wrapped her tiny arms around his neck, and for the first time, he allowed himself to rest his head on her shoulder. He could feel the warmth of her body, the rhythmic rise and fall of her breath, and for a moment, just a moment, everything felt like it could be okay. Maybe this time, he wouldn't be abandoned. Maybe this time, he would belong. Max's transformation was slow but undeniable. He still flinched at loud noises, still looked around nervously whenever anyone came too close. But each day, he grew a little stronger, a little braver. The world wasn't as big and terrifying as it once was. There were hands now that reached for him with care, voices that spoke his name with love. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that he was loved. He no longer wandered the streets, watching others live lives that seemed so far away. He lived in a home, with a family who called him their own. The little girl, Emily, had become his anchor, and he her protector. The dog who had once watched from the shadows was now a part of the light. And as the sun set on yet another day, Max lay at the foot of Emily's bed, his tail wagging gently. He had found his place in the world, and for the first time, he knew that home was not just a place. It was the people you loved, the people who loved you back. The next day, Max couldn't help but return to the same spot, where Lily had first reached out to him. His paws were heavy as he trudged through the grass, and his breath was shallow. He hadn't expected to feel this way again, the hope rising in his chest like a quiet flame. But as the hours passed, and the street remained silent, the cold feeling of abandonment began to creep back into his bones. Where was she? Where was the little girl who had seen him when no one else did? Just as he turned to leave, a noise caught his attention. It was faint at first, just the sound of someone's soft footsteps, the crunch of leaves underfoot. Max's ears perked up, and he froze, hoping that it was her. There, at the edge of his vision, he saw her, a small figure with a pink coat, and her hair braided in 2 neat pigtails. She was walking slowly toward him, eyes locked on his. Just like the day before. Max's heart thumped louder in his chest. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't used to feeling this way. The world had always moved around him, never stopping to notice, to care. But here she was, standing before him, holding out a piece of bread like a treasure. It was the same as before, yet this time, there was something different about it. Connection, a promise. The little girl knelt down, and Max hesitated only for a moment before taking the bread from her hand. She didn't speak, but her smile told him everything. The connection they shared felt fragile, yet it held weight, like something precious. Something worth holding on to. As the days passed, Max began to expect her visits more and more. She would come with food, sometimes a small toy or a kind word, even though he didn't understand all the words. What mattered was the warmth she brought with her. Her presence was the sunlight that pierced through the clouds of his past. It was something he didn't know he could still feel. And it was something he had never expected to find again. The bond they shared grew, though Max could never quite bring himself to fully trust it. Every time she walked away, his heart sank. He watched her disappear down the street, the sounds of her footsteps fading like the last notes of a song. The emptiness that followed her departure was like a chill that set in his bones, a reminder that nothing good ever lasted. And then the worst thing happened. Lily stopped coming. The days passed without her, and Max waited by the fence, his eyes scanning the streets for the familiar pink coat. He remembered her smile, the way she looked at him as though he mattered. But that was all it was now. Memory. His food grew scarce and his body weakened, but the ache inside him was even deeper. He could feel it gnawing at him, a quiet despair that threatened to swallow him whole. One afternoon the sky turned grey and the cold wind began to pick up. Max had not eaten in a day, and his body felt fragile, like a broken shell. He lay down in his usual spot by the fence, staring into the empty street. The sound of children laughing and playing was distant, a reminder of what he no longer had access to. He longed for her touch, for that gentle connection, but it was gone. The tears he could not shed left him empty inside. His body curled tighter into itself as the hours dragged on. But when the sun set, there was still no sign of Lily. He closed his eyes against the cold wind and fell into a fitful sleep, dreaming of a life that could have been, of a world where he belonged. The following weeks were nothing more than a blur of cold, hunger, and loneliness. Max lost track of the days, the hours merging into one endless cycle of despair. He wandered the streets aimlessly, no longer watching the families pass by. The sharp pain of rejection had worn him down, and he had stopped hoping. He had learned long ago that waiting for people to stay was futile. Yet somehow, in the midst of his darkest days, a glimmer of something unexpected appeared. A new family moved into the house down the street. Max was hesitant at first. He had seen new people come and go so many times. They always walked past him, oblivious to his existence, but this time something was different. It wasn't just the new faces or the unfamiliar scent. It was the way they moved, the way they looked around. Max could feel their curiosity. Could they see him? Or was he just another shadow to them? Days went by, and the family seemed to settle in. But no one had noticed Max, until one afternoon, when the little girl who lived there caught sight of him. She was standing by her front door, looking out into the street, when her eyes met his. Max stood frozen, watching her with both wariness and yearning. Something about her seemed different from the others. There was no fear in her eyes, no indifference. She simply stared at him as if she could see the pain in his eyes. Max could feel it. This was his chance. Without thinking, his paws moved forward, his body trembling as he approached her. She didn't back away or flinch like the others did. She simply crouched down, hands outstretched in a gesture of kindness. Max hesitated, torn between his instinct to run and the yearning to trust again. For a moment, everything stood still. He could feel the warmth of the sunlight on his back, the soft scent of the grass, and the sound of the girl's heartbeat, strong and steady. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped closer, and when his nose touched her hand, he knew that it was the right decision. He was ready to trust again. Max's life began to change the moment he stepped into the warmth of the family's home. The smell of food, the gentle hum of conversation, the steady presence of people who did not look at him with pity, but with understanding. Everything about this place was new. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when Max felt the weight of his past, moments when the old fears crept back in. But there was something about this family that made him feel safe, something that made him believe he had a chance. At first, Max was cautious. He stayed in the corner of the room observing, unsure of where he fit in this new world. But Emily, the little girl who had seen him when no one else had, was patient. She didn't rush him, didn't force him to do anything he wasn't ready for. She simply sat beside him, day after day, letting him come to her in his own time. Slowly, Max began to understand that this wasn't just another fleeting moment, another empty promise. This was real. The first night he spent in the house, Emily climbed into bed with him. She wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "Good night, Max," and in that moment Max felt the smallest shift in his heart. This was it. This was home. The pain of the past still lingered, but it was no longer all that defined him. For the first time in a long while, he let himself sleep, let himself rest. He knew that this family wasn't like the others. They weren't going to leave. They were here to stay. As the weeks turned into months, Max grew stronger. His fur began to regain its shine, his eyes sparkled with life, and his heart slowly healed. He had found something precious, a family who cared for him, who accepted him not just for what he was but for everything he had been. The shadows of his past still followed him, but they no longer held him captive. He had a place in the world now. He had love, and that was more than he ever thought he could have. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Max lay at Emily's feet, his head resting in her lap. The warmth of the house wrapped around them like a blanket, and the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the air. Max felt something stir in his chest, a deep, contented peace. He was no longer the stray dog on the streets watching families come and go. He was part of something real. The years passed, and Max's bond with Emily only grew stronger. She had become his everything, the one person who had given him a chance when no one else had. And as he lay beside her, the moonlight filtering through the window, Max knew that no matter what happened, this love would be his forever. Home wasn't just a place. It was the people you loved and the ones who loved you back. And for Max, that home had finally come. As the night drifted into silence, Max sighed contentedly, his tail gently wagging. He closed his eyes, knowing that he had found his place in the world, his forever home. Max's life had transformed into something beyond what he had ever dreamed of. Each morning, as Emily rushed down the stairs, her laughter echoing through the house, Max would rise, his tail wagging furiously, and meet her at the door. She was no longer just the girl who gave him bread on the street. She was the one who had healed him, piece by piece, the way only someone who truly understands you can. She had been the bridge from his lonely past to his hopeful future. The family had come to love him, not just as a pet but as part of their family. They didn't just see a stray dog, they saw Max. The quiet moments they shared, sitting together on the couch, or walking through the park with the sun setting behind them, became memories Max held close. He would look at Emily, her eyes bright and full of life, and a warmth would fill his chest. This was what it felt like to be loved, but the healing wasn't instant. It was a journey, one that had taken months to even begin. There were nights when Max would still wake up, his heart pounding, remembering the cold streets he had once roamed. But now, Emily's voice would comfort him, her hand steady and gentle as she whispered, "It's okay, Max, I'm right here." And in those moments, the world outside, the cold, the loneliness, faded away. Max learned to trust again, not just with Emily but with the whole family. They were kind, patient, understanding. They allowed him to come into their lives at his own pace, never rushing him, never pushing him to be anything other than what he was. Slowly, his fears began to fade into the background. There was no need to hide anymore. Max had found a home, not just in a house, but in the hearts of those who truly cared. As the seasons changed, Max became more than just a companion to Emily. He was her protector, her confidant. When she cried, Max was there, resting his head on her lap, his big brown eyes filled with empathy. When she laughed, Max would dance around, his paws light and quick, making her smile even wider. They were a team now, inseparable, as if they had always been meant to be together. And even though Max still had moments of hesitation, of remembering the past, it was no longer the defining part of who he was. The streets had given him pain, but this home had given him everything he had lost: love, safety, and peace. One evening, as Emily sat by the window, reading a book, Max watched her from his spot by the fireplace. The sun was setting, casting a soft glow over the room. Emily paused for a moment, looking up from her book, and their eyes met. She smiled, a smile that had become as familiar to Max as the sound of his own heartbeat. "I love you, Max," she said, her voice soft and full of meaning. Max's tail thumped against the floor in response, his eyes shining with a love that words could never fully express. He had found his place in the world. This was his family. This was home. And as he curled up next to Emily, his head resting on her feet, he knew that this moment, this life, was all he had ever needed. For the first time in so long, Max felt complete. No longer was he the dog who watched from the sidelines. No longer was he the invisible one. He was Max, beloved and safe, with a family who loved him back. As Emily's breath evened out and the night grew deeper, Max closed his eyes and drifted to sleep. His dreams were no longer filled with the cold winds of the past, but with the warmth of the life he had finally found. A life where love, trust, and belonging were no longer distant memories, but a daily reality. And for once, he didn't have to wait for the world to change. He had found his place in it, right here, in the heart of the family that had never let him go. And so, as the stars twinkled outside the window, Max rested easy, knowing that, at last, he was home. The years that followed felt like a quiet, rhythmic song. Each day a verse, each moment a note in a melody of love and healing. Max's transformation was gradual, but undeniable. The once wary and withdrawn dog had grown into a confident, joyful companion, his golden fur now thick and shining in the sunlight. His eyes, once dull and hollow, now sparkled with life and affection. The scars of his past, though never fully erased, had softened, fading into the background of the new life he had built. He had found his place in the world, not just as a pet, but as a member of the family. There were no more cold streets to wander, no more lonely nights spent under the dim glow of streetlights. He had a bed now, warm and soft, beside Emily's. He had a place at the dinner table, not as a beggar, but as a beloved family member. Every meal, every walk, every quiet evening spent together was a testament to how far he had come. And yet, there were still moments when the shadows of his past crept in, moments when he would stand at the edge of the yard, his gaze distant, as if he were searching for something he couldn't quite remember. On those days, Emily would sit beside him, her hand resting gently on his head, her voice a soft murmur of comfort. "It's okay, Max," she would say. "You're home now. You don't have to be afraid anymore." It was in these moments that Max truly understood what home meant. Not just a roof over his head, but a feeling that wrapped around him like a warm blanket. It was the quiet security that came from knowing, deep down, that he was loved. And with every passing day, the pain of the past seemed farther and farther away. One crisp autumn afternoon, Max and Emily walked through the park together. The leaves had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, drifting gently to the ground as they walked side by side. Emily skipped ahead, her laughter carrying on the breeze, while Max trotted beside her, his steps light and full of life. He no longer watched from the sidelines, no longer lingered in the shadows of a world that seemed too big for him. He was a part of this world now, his world, their world. The world where he was wanted, where he belonged. As they reached the park bench, Emily sat down, her legs tucked beneath her, and Max lay at her feet, his head resting on her lap. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the park, and Emily absent-mindedly stroked Max's fur, her fingers tracing the familiar contours of his body. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The silence between them was comfortable, full of understanding. It was the silence of two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of places. Max looked up at Emily, his tail wagging lazily. She met his gaze, her eyes soft with affection. She didn't need to say anything. The love they shared was too deep for words. It was the kind of love that didn't need to be declared, only felt, quietly, powerfully, in every shared moment, in every shared breath. For the first time in his life, Max knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. And as the night fell, with the stars beginning to twinkle above them, he closed his eyes, content in the knowledge that he had found something far greater than a home. He had found a family that saw him, loved him, and gave him the chance to love back. Max had been a stray, wandering the streets, invisible to the world. But now, he was everything he had ever hoped to be. He was loved. He was home. As the stars dotted the sky above the quiet park, Max lay by Emily's side, his body warm against the cool earth. The sounds of the evening, distant voices, the rustling of leaves, the soft hum of the night, drifted through the air like a lullaby. In this moment, Max was at peace, not just with the world, but with himself. He had found his place, his purpose, and the family that would never let him go. The past no longer held him prisoner. And as the moonlight bathed him in its soft glow, Max knew that this, right here, was everything he had ever needed. With Emily by his side, Max had finally found the home he had spent so long searching for. Max had spent so much of his life on the edges, watching families come and go, longing for a touch, a sign, anything that would make him feel like he belonged. But now, as the years passed in a slow, peaceful rhythm, he had come to understand something he never thought possible. He didn't need to wait for the world to change. He had changed. One autumn afternoon, as the air turned crisp and the leaves fell in delicate spirals, Max and Emily strolled through the park together. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows and turning the trees into brilliant hues of red and gold. Emily's laughter rang out as she skipped ahead, and Max trotted beside her, the familiar click of his paws on the ground marking each step forward. His fur, once ragged and dull, now shone with vitality. His body no longer bore the weary signs of hunger and neglect, but instead was strong, proud, full of life. They made their way to the park bench, a place Max had come to know well. Emily settled herself on the bench, tucking her legs beneath her, while Max lay down at her feet, his head resting in her lap. The evening stretched out before them, quiet and comfortable, as if the world itself had paused just for them. Max closed his eyes for a moment, his heart steady. The steady rhythm of Emily's breathing calming him, filling him with a peace he had longed for, but never truly believed he could find. The world around them was alive with the soft rustling of leaves, the distant hum of passing cars, and the gentle whisper of the wind. It was in moments like these that Max felt the fullness of his transformation. He had come so far from the dog who once wandered the streets, abandoned and invisible. He was no longer a shadow in the distance. He was here, in the warmth of this moment, fully present with the girl who had brought him back to life. Emily absent-mindedly ran her fingers through Max's fur, the familiar gesture of affection that always made him feel safe. He looked up at her, meeting her gaze with eyes full of love and trust. She smiled down at him, her eyes soft and gentle, the kind of smile that made Max's heart swell. He didn't need to hear the words, he knew what they meant. He was home. He was loved. The sounds of the evening drifted around them, and for a brief moment, time seemed to slow. There was no rush, no need for anything to change. They simply sat there, together, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the world. Max had found his place, his family, and for the first time in a long while, he felt complete. Emily leaned down, resting her cheek against Max's head. "I love you, Max," she whispered softly, her voice barely more than a breath. Max's tail thumped gently against the ground in response. It was enough. The simple, unspoken bond between them said everything. They had saved each other in ways they could never fully explain. Max had come into Emily's life, a broken, lost soul, and she had given him everything he had once lost. And now, he was the one who had been changed, shaped by the love and warmth she had given him. He was no longer the stray dog on the edge of the world. He was Max, the dog who had been given a second chance. As the evening turned to night, the stars began to appear, twinkling softly above them. Emily leaned back against the bench, Max resting at her feet, his eyes half closed as he basked in the warmth of the moment. The world was quiet, peaceful, and in this stillness, Max felt a profound sense of gratitude. It wasn't just about finding a home. It was about the journey he had taken to get here. The journey that had been full of pain, loneliness, and longing, but ultimately led him to the place he was now loved, safe, and at peace. Emily's hand gently stroked his fur as they sat in silence, the only sound the rustling of the leaves and the occasional distant murmur of a car driving by. It was a small moment, but for Max, it was everything. This was the life he had always dreamed of, the life he never thought he would get. And now that he had it, he knew he would never take it for granted. The night deepened around them, and Max felt his eyes grow heavy, the warmth of Emily's presence soothing him into a peaceful slumber. He had found his place in the world. He had found his family. And for the first time in a long while, he knew that he would never be alone again. As the moonlight bathed the park in its soft glow, Max rested his head against Emily's lap, his body at ease. He had finally found a place where he belonged. The past was no longer a shadow that haunted him. He was here. He was home. And for the first time, he could truly rest.